Hello, everybody. I'm Philburt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
Welcome to the only show about the workplace that offers you front row seats and a microphone, bringing you practical, timely, and accurate insights so that you can more effectively lead your organization. It's Thursday, October 20th, episode 202. Today, we're talking psychological safety. How encouraging employees to make mistakes can actually improve innovation and decision making. We also answer a question we received from Donald, a live listener from last week, who needs clarification on Amendment 1. And why did Phil's new sign-off last week lead to an appearance from Patrick Swayze on Philburt's Phorum? As always, we welcome your thoughts and take your questions. All this and more on This Week at Work.
With me today in place of Burt Garland is Melissa Pesce, Senior Counsel with Ogletree Deakins, a leader in employment law. Happy you could join us today, Melissa. Why don't you just say hello to the group and tell us a little bit about yourself quickly?
Well, good morning. I'm really glad to be here. I have been practicing labor and employment law for about 27 years. So love what I'm doing, working with employers and working on issues related to employment law.
Well, we're happy to have you with us, and I tell you, it is a breath of fresh air not to have Burt here and to get some real talent on the program today. Well, we're going to get started, like always, with our poll question, and today we're going to talk about something that you may or may not have heard of, and we're going to discuss psychological safety and what it takes to create an environment that encourages employees to fully participate as their best self. So here's the poll question today. When you hear about psychological safety in the workplace, what do you think of most? And we have 6 options for you to select from. We'd love to have your participation. We will report back on these results a little bit later in the show, as we always do. And should you choose to comment, we love your comments because that helps us really zero the conversation in to best serve you so you are more informed to most effectively run your business. All right, Melissa, let's get started. We start the program every time with something that's called Lawyer on the Clock. Now, not one time has Burt finished in exactly 6 minutes yet, but this is the segment where we give our attorney 6 minutes to tell us what's going on across the United States that might impact the workplace. And last week, Don did ask a question about Amendment 1 in Illinois. We have a tremendous amount of listeners in the state of Illinois, and we know how complicated that state can be for employment law. So if you could please at least touch on that at some point in the next 6 minutes.
Okay.
Nick's going to run our intro clip, and then you are on the clock.
All right, I'm ready. All right, so let's start out with Amendment 1, which is on the ballot coming up in November, on November 8th, 2022 in Illinois. And what it is, it's a constitutional or a proposed constitutional amendment that would guarantee the right to organize. And it would essentially take away any options for right to work. So this would allow all employees the absolute right to organize, guarantee collective bargaining with the representative of their choice, and it's going to prohibit right to work in the state. And there are a few other states like that already have similar amendments on the ballot. This is one that a lot of people are watching to see if Illinois moves into the 4th state that has one of these types of constitutional amendments guaranteeing employees the right to.
So, Melissa, what does that mean in layman's term when we say it guarantees someone the right to organize? Don't they already have a right to organize?
They do, but there are a lot of shops out there that are non-union shops that try to keep a non-union atmosphere. And this would be a constitutional amendment that would guarantee employees the right, if they want to organize, if they want to unionize, if they want to pick a representative, it would give employees the opportunity to do that.
Will they still have to go through a voting process, or is it literally I can sign up and belong to a group that is represented by a labor union?
And I'm not sure, based on the text of the current constitutional amendment, if that has all been worked through yet.
Okay.
If they would have, what the procedural process would be in order to organize. But this is really just guaranteeing, it kind of goes back to our US Constitution, guaranteeing the fundamental right to free speech. This would be a constitutional amendment that would guarantee the fundamental right to organize in the state of Illinois.
I'm glad you brought up the guaranteed right to free speech, because we are going to talk about that when we get into psychological safety as well. Okay, Melissa, thank you for sharing that. Do you have any insight? One last question. I hate to put you on the spot, but you are on the clock.
All right.
Does it affect a current organized facility? So if I already have a union, do you know if it has any impact on that group or not?
It should not have any impact on facilities that are already organized. They're already organized and operating under a collective bargaining agreement. Those are not going to be affected. Where you might see effects is in situations where you've got non-union or there has been opposition to unionization. Those types of employers are likely to see some type of a change.
Very good. Thank you, Melissa. All right. You have 2 minutes and 67 seconds, whatever.
All right. Well, one of the other things that I think a lot of people have been watching lately is the Department of Labor is trying to revamp the independent contractor test. And they're saying they're going to streamline it. I think that a lot of us lawyers are a little skeptical as to whether or not it's actually going to streamline it or it's going to cause some confusion. But the Department of Labor said, hey, let's really get it down to 2 core factors. And those factors are the degree of control over the work, which they've always kind of looked at, but then also focusing more on the worker's opportunity for profit and loss, and looking at things about the investment that the individual worker has in the particular business, and the extent to which skill is involved, and all of those different things. So keep an eye on the Department of Labor and this independent contractor test and how that all plays out. There's been a couple of issues in the labor market lately. Amazon in Albany, New York, rejected unionization on a 2-to-1 margin. But then on the other side of the coin, we've got Apple down at Oklahoma City, who has decided to organize, and they become the second Apple store nationwide who has decided to unionize and create a labor force. And so
they did vote. They voted the union in the store there in Oak City.
They did, yeah. So Oklahoma City, that Apple store becomes the second one in the country to vote in a union, and they become unionized.
So Burt and I have been talking a lot about the union pressure in the retail space, whether it's been Starbucks or Amazon retail being in their warehouse. I guess that wouldn't necessarily be the retail we think of, but as well as Home Depot and others. That pressure continues to be there as they're trying to fulfill their promise to, I guess, increase their labor footprint with the Democratic presidency and Congress that they have today.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing this all over the country with different places, just like you mentioned, with Starbucks and different retail establishments. And Amazon, I believe in the Albany, New York, was more of a warehouse situation. It wasn't really a retail situation, but it's the same concept that you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Melissa. Keep going, please, if you have more.
Well, you know what? I think that pretty much covers what I had today.
How about that? Burt never finished on time, Melissa. We are so happy that you're able to do that.
I'm here to finish on time and succeed.
We'll have to see. You might supersede him, and we might be asking him to join as our guest when you're not available. But thank you for that. And that was Lawyer on the Clock. I appreciate that. I hope that helps you, Mr. Adamski, with the Amendment 1 in Illinois. Thank you very much. And now the next segment is Philburt's Forum. Last week, we got some attention because I signed off by saying, be nice to people. And all I was trying to do is encourage us to be nice to people. And so that inspired a clip from Roadhouse. But let's go ahead and kick off Philburt's Forum.
Be nice. If you won't walk, walk him, but be nice. If you can't walk him, one of the others will help you, and you'll both be nice. Remember that it's a job. It's nothing personal. Sorry, we're closed.
Well, then what are all these people doing here?
Drinking and having a good time.
Well, that's why we're here.
You're too stupid to have a good time.
Oh, you're too stupid to have a good time. That is such a great scene, to be nice to people. And later in that scene, he goes on, and I think eventually he slams somebody's head on the bar as he's trying to throw him out. And one of the other bouncers says, "Hey, I thought you said be nice." And then he follows that up with, "That was nice." So it's a great program. I don't know if you're a Roadhouse fan or not. I grew up with Patrick Swayze and Dirty Dancing and Roadhouse. I absolutely love it. That was a great movie. It made me want to be a bouncer. And here I am running an association. Sometimes I feel like doing a little bouncing from time to time, but I got to remind myself to be nice. Either one, you, Tanya or Melissa, enjoy Roadhouse?
Love Roadhouse. Love Patrick Swayze.
Yeah, most women do. My wife.
What's not to love about Patrick Swayze?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I fall more in the Dirty Dancing category, but
I was going to say the same.
To be nice. So there you go, Phil.
Yeah.
Well, see, you played to both audience. He had your audience for Dirty Dancing. He had me for Roadhouse. It works out perfectly. Yeah. All right. So let's remind everyone that we do have our poll. We want your comments and feedback for that, and we're going to share that. And it's time to move on to our main topic here, which is psychological safety. And Tanya, that's why we wanted you to join us again. You always do such a good job working with our members in the area of culture development and employee opinion and engagement surveys and feedback, and really helping workplaces create an environment where people are actually being their best self. So let me ask you, Tanya, is this a term that you've heard before? And what does this term psychological safety mean to you?
So, Phil, I do love working on employee engagement, and I like it for two things. One, I think that we find our identity in the work that we do. And so when we provide an environment where people can show up as their whole self and have the opportunity to really feel like they're making an impact, we just help our communities. But on the other hand, we also know that when people are engaged, they're really, really effective teams. And so I think this term psychological safety is really being rebranded as team effectiveness. We heard a lot about this in the early 90s. And I think this psychological safety really got some traction with Amy Edmondson. She was on a TED Talk and she kind of talked about her research and what she had done around it. But really for those older generation people that are listening this morning.
Be careful. We have a lot of people my age listening.
I kind of fall in that category now too. There's a couple generations coming up behind me, and this idea of team effectiveness. And so I love the poll that we have up, and I'm seeing some of the answers that are coming through. And I think these things around really focused on the word safety are important. And I'm loving that we're going to get into that conversation. But to kind of frame it, we want to be effective, and we can't be effective if we can't express our ideas. If there's no tolerance for failure, what we start to do is we start to close people off, and they're not willing to show up and bring all of the talents that you hired them for. So psychological safety is maybe a pause. It's a reflection of saying, well, what is the environment and the culture we're not only cultivating in our organizations, but maybe most importantly within our individual teams? And what are our frontline managers? What tools do they have to make sure their teams are psychologically safe?
So when you think of this, I think about some of the training programs that we provide to many employers around about really helping supervisors be more effective at creating engagement, really being able to effectively communicate in a way that it does involve you to get the best out of that workforce. That's what we're really trying to do. Now, when we hear psychological safety and we think about just leaving that to chance that people are going to get it right, and you do a lot of feedback with surveys and so forth, that doesn't happen usually very well for us when we're leaving it to chance, just assuming we're going to get it right.
Correct. Yeah, that's what we see a lot in the surveys. And especially as we're navigating all of these changes, what I'm hearing not only in our engagement surveys, but also when I'm meeting individually with employees in our focus groups and some one-on-one work that I do, they're really asking, does anybody see me? I feel like I've been going above and beyond. And does anybody see and appreciate the work that I'm doing? And I think for that to be the case, we do have to be very intentional about this idea around psychological safety. And so one of the tools that we're leaning into is really a team charter. How do we bring people on? What does that onboarding process look like so that we can introduce new hires to the culture of our environment? What are our boundaries for our teams? And sometimes this is things like, do people respond to meeting invites, right? Because that's a way to say, hey, I got your email and I'm going to be there and I respect and value your time. So I think we can take a really big term like psychological safety, and the key is breaking it down. Really, Phil, I think back to kindness. Are we operating with kindness? Are we acknowledging other people when they're talking? And do we create that environment? And I think it does fall on our managers to make sure that we maintain that. Look, the biggest thing that can kill team effectiveness is negativity. And when we look around our world, it's really hard to escape negativity. And so we've got to create some sort of culture that has some boundaries so that when we're operating in the workplace, we have space that we're not bringing that negativity into the team dynamic.
I love the direction you're going with this. I want to look at the poll results, and then I want to come back to some of the comments that you just said. And I'd like to get Melissa's opinion on a couple things as well. Nick, can you pull up the poll results for us? All right, here we have the poll results, and it looks like overwhelmingly the answer 67%, if I'm reading that right, is a place where it is okay to fail and share opinions. And that's great. We would expect that, right? We encourage that for our children when they're young, and we want them to learn and explore and develop and be better at decision making every single day. However, when I think about that, I think the opposite is occurring, right? What appears to me is psychological safety may also have the impact of I can say what I want, when I want it, to who I want to say it to, because I have the right of freedom of speech, and you encourage that in the workplace. And then you have the negative impact, which is that kind of shuns me off from saying anything at all. Because now I'm intimidated, and it's actually an intimidation factor. We see it a lot during political environments, more recent times over the last couple campaigns. So Melissa, that often gets interpreted as, well, it's a freedom of speech. I can say what I would like to say.
Yeah. So, what's interesting is when I first saw this topic last night and I did a little dive into it, and I started thinking about how, from a legal perspective, what does this mean? And what I really realized in reading about it is that it really comes back to probably most of the employers who are on the core values of the company, looking at anti-harassment policies, looking at anti-bullying policies, open door policies. And so when you talk about psychological safety, we are not talking about allowing employees to say whatever they want, whenever they want. That is absolutely not what this is about. It's about fostering diversity. It's about fostering different ideas and making sure that there is an open, inclusive environment. And so I think if you look at it from the perspective of what are your company's core values and how do we incorporate psychological safety into those core values, certainly I can't imagine employers saying a core value is allowing somebody to bully another employee. And that is what we're talking about today, is making sure that employees feel valued, that they feel like they can speak up. And in the end, it's going to make for a more diverse, a more inclusive environment, but it's also going to make sure that everyone is heard. And it'll likely in the end make sure that mistakes are caught, because somebody feels like they can speak up and say, hey, this isn't the right direction to go. And it's not silencing anybody's voice. So I think that that's really where, looking at it from a lawyer's perspective, when I think of psychological safety, I think, okay, how does this really factor into the core policies that we have in place, and making sure that we're abiding by those, the EEO policies, making sure that there is no discrimination in the workplace, allowing everybody to have a voice.
And in a case where we do have employees who they speak over others, right? They're projecting their opinions on top of other opinions or over other opinions at the expense of someone else's comfort, their safety. Any idea on when that starts to occur? How do we lead those people away from that behavior? Any ideas from either one of you?
Yeah, I would jump in on this one. And I think that one of the things that I talk about a lot is, have we set clear expectations, right? It's really hard to hold people accountable if we haven't spelled out expectations. And that's why I love a team charter, because in a team charter, we're going to talk about ground rules of our group. And when we're together in a meeting, what we want to do is we want to come back to that value system, and we want to talk about how we're misaligned to the values that we've all agreed to in this culture and in this workplace. And so when that's happening in that exact situation where people are talking over one another, that's where the leader is to step in and say, I'm going to take a pause here. One of the things that we agreed to in the group is we were going to have respectful dialogue. And when we talked about conflict, we were going to handle that in a way that everyone was heard. That's number 8 on our ground rules. That way, what we've done, and I think Brene Brown spells this out in her Dare to Lead. I think this is where you'll find it. But she talks about conflict and how to have conflict with employees. And she talks, I've summarized it, is it a couch conversation or a desk conversation, right? And that might sound funny, but when we're at a desk, it's me against you, right? And we're putting that face in face. But at the point we can come beside someone and discuss the issue, that's when we get to real resolution. And so I think as managers and as leaders, we want to have this dialogue. We want to have competing ideas, because we know diverse ideas is what gets us to the best solution. But it takes a special skill set in our managers to be able to facilitate those conversations in a way that everyone feels respected when they leave the room.
Absolutely. So let's think about this in the context sometimes of whistleblower, right? So we have policies that help us from a whistleblowing standpoint, channels for people to communicate things there where they feel they don't have a voice anywhere else, to take a problem or a complaint because it might involve their manager or someone above them. And that is that part of having a psychological safe work environment, is having policies like that as well?
Oh, absolutely. If I could jump in, policies to me are very, very important, and that sets the tone for everybody. Everyone knows that they're playing by the same set of rules, and that the rules apply to everyone. And I think that is so important in the workplace, is making sure that from your lowest level employee all the way up to the top, everyone is held accountable to the same standards, and that your top executives in the company and the managers and supervisors are leading by example and providing a safe space and looking out for employees who may not feel like they have a voice, or are not able to stand up and say, I feel like I'm being inhibited in the work that I'm doing, and knowing that it's a part of the culture of the company to step in and say, this is not okay.
Yeah. So we have a lot of really good comments. I can't get to all of them, but several good comments from Kim and Susan and many others. But Tanya, you've made a comment in the pre-program of why this phrase kind of resonates with people today, even though it's not a real new practice. And you were referring to kind of the younger generations in school and kind of where they're at as it relates to the conversation that occurs in a school today and how that then eventually translates into the workplace. Can you maybe reflect on that and paraphrase it back to the group, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that fascinates me is the research that we're doing about the mind and what we're learning about the brain and mental health and all of that. And that research has exploded in the last 3 to 4 decades. And as a result of that, we have more tools that we can share with people. And so this youngest generation has been learning about mental health from the day they stepped into school. I mean, I'm of the older generation, right? But we didn't talk about mental health when I was in high school and middle school. And I can tell you, I have high schoolers and they're coming home talking about it all day, every day. And so a term of psychological safety is something that they're going to resonate with, to say, oh no, I'm going to protect my mental health. And so I think as employers, we have to really lean in and understand and meet people where they are. And I know, like, it could be off-putting, right? There's some people listening, when they hear psychological safety, it's really off-putting. And it's one of those, one more thing I have to do to take care of someone. And I think we have to look beyond the label into some of these tips that we're talking about in terms of team effectiveness, because that's really what we're saying. And what we know is that an engaged employee is an effective employee. And if there are things that are standing in the way, and these are kind of basic things, right? Is there somebody on my team that's deliberately trying to undermine my effort? Well, what does that look like? That looks like the conversation after the meeting, right? When everybody's in the back hall chit-chatting because they don't feel comfortable actually talking about it in the meeting. That creates an environment where people feel like they can't trust the decisions that are being made, that the team is coming to. And so it's things like that. Do I have someone that I can pull aside and say, hey, I don't really understand this. Can you help me? Without then having that broadcast to the entire group and say, well, James didn't understand this, so we're going to review it again. There's these very minor ways that we can communicate better that create that environment where people feel safe to really show their whole self and to show a side of them that is vulnerable. And we know that vulnerability is what leads to effective teams.
And I think about that as well as, I went to school and studied safety as a profession. That was what my degree was in, safety management. And we never talked about psychological safety, I can tell you that. So I had to kind of get a little bit familiar with this topic. And I do think of it more about team effectiveness. And I don't really see a lot of the differences until you said it that way, right? So resource officers in school was kind of a new thing when I was there. Now many schools have resource officers, and the concept that we're going to protect you at school and protect your views and the things we can and can't say. And then you get into a workplace and we're all expected to be adults. And we don't have resource officers. We have human resource professionals, and we have supervisors and managers who are, looking after our well-being, but without training, right? The expectation is going to be a misdirection, right? Because it's a new place, it's a new forum, and I'm dealing with different generations who haven't had this mental preparation for the sensitivity around mental health and so on. And I know enough just from conversations with friends and families, the opinions on this are all over the board. It's one thing for us as a group of professionals to have similar like-minded opinions, but when you bring in all generations and all professions and all walks of life, the opinions are all over the board, and that's what we have at the workplace. Melissa, you look like you wanted to say something, so I don't want to cut you off here.
I just wanted to say that while we're talking about being open, that there is a fine line there between, and you mentioned it earlier, Phil, about the First Amendment and being able to say whatever you want. It is not an open door policy to be able to say whatever you want. It is not being able to use psychological safety as a crutch or an excuse for poor performance. If someone is truly performing badly, it doesn't mean that you can't go to them and critique them and create and make sure that negative behavior is being corrected. That is not what this is all about. This is about fostering positivity, but not allowing employees to do and say whatever they want whenever they want. And I think that that's really important for employers to hear, because a lot of times when you hear terms like psychological safety, people think, oh my God, now anybody can do whatever they want and get away with it. And that is absolutely not what we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in fact, that would have the opposite effect, right? Like if we allowed people to just come in and say whatever they wanted to say, that may allow one person's voice, but how many other voices are being silenced? And so that's what's really key, that we have to maintain a culture that is a culture of respect. And that's where I go back to things like the values of the company. That is so important, that we're all in agreement. Starting with your interview process, we should be talking about that in the interview process. These are the values of our organization. Right. These are our cultural norms within our organization. Talk to me how you fit within this, because we need to broadcast those expectations, because otherwise it's not going to be a good fit from the start. And so we need to continue that through onboarding, through when we're doing employee feedback and we're doing one-on-ones. Those values need to be center of the conversation. And then I'm suggesting taking it one step further and have that hard conversation with your team, because Phil, to your point, people are all over the map on some of these topics. And so we can't actually facilitate all of that. But what we can do is say, hey, when we function as a team, these are our boundaries and our rules, and we all agree to them. And as new hires come in, we talk about that.
And I think, again, that's going to get right back. And I'm amazed at the number of organizations out there that don't invest in developing their managers and supervisors to effectively lead these types of behaviors in the workplace, because it results in so much better engagement, higher level performance, better retention, better attendance, all the things that we're suffering from on many fronts. And it starts with arming our supervisors and managers how to navigate, these challenges as they face them. That is all the time that we have today. I want to say thank you very much, Melissa, for joining us and being a first-time guest. You did a great job. I was happy to have you. We will have Burt back on the program, but we have one question from Patty I need you to answer. She was asking, when is the Amendment 1? Is that a November election?
It is.
Yeah, so it's November election.
Yep, it's on the ballot in November. And so after November, the good citizens of Illinois will vote on it and see if the constitutional amendment takes effect.
There you go. All right. And let's remember the golden rule, because if we just practice the golden rule, we all will be just fine. But thank you very much for joining today. And remember, be nice to people.
Recruiting the right person is hard. Don't be fooled by a one-size-fits-all approach to solving your unique workforce talent needs. Work with an AIM advisor to zero in on what is best for you. AIM offers a la carte services or entire system solutions. Everything from technology, job postings, recruiting, and compensation analysis to contract HR services and many more. Click on the link below to get a complete list of services and learn more about how AIM can help.